Hello, I'm Peter Miller. I'm Dean of the Bard Graduate Center, and I'm here with Nathan Schlanger to talk about a new book appearing soon in Cultural Histories of the Material World. The book is entitled Andre Dubois on Technology, Material Civilization, Technical Behavior, and the Evolution of Technicity, a selection of writings from the 1930s to the 1960s. Nathan is the editor of the volume, and we'll be talking to him today about its subject, the French archaeologist and anthropologist Andre Dubois. Nathan is professor of archaeology at the École Nationale des Chartes. He has his PhD from Cambridge, held a postdoc at Oxford, and ran the European program on the archives of archaeology. So he is well suited to tell us all about the subject of this book. So let me start with a first question. Andre Dubois in France is often paired with Claude Lévi-Strauss as the great anthropologists of the middle and later part of the 20th century. But in the English-speaking and English-reading world, he is very little known. Can I ask why that is, this discrepancy?
Thank you, Peter. Well, certainly the knowledge of Dubois is very partial and unevenly distributed. Unlike Lévi-Strauss has a very clear career. He was a philosopher, became ethnologist in all the proper institutions of the Republic. Dubois left school at 14 and had a very erratic career, at least initially, in museum, teaching in Lyon, and only from the late 1950s going back to Paris, and only in '69 being elected at the Collège de France, long after Lévi-Strauss. He is known mainly for the second part of his career related to his archaeological work. On the one hand, his work on rock art, his interpretation of Paleolithic rock art, and on the other hand, his work on the excavation techniques, especially the excavation of the site of Pincevent from 1964 onwards, where he developed this practice of paléontology or décapage, horizontal studies in order to understand prehistoric societies in a horizontal time frame. For these two aspects, he's actually well known and quoted and cited amongst archaeologists. The part of his work that is unknown or that has been missed is his reflection on technology, on evolution, on the way that technicity forms part of our constitution as human beings from 3 million years ago and until today. And that's the aspect that I would like to emphasize in this book.
Why is technology or technicité important to you as a subject to explore?
Well, personally, I've always been interested in doing things with my hands. I'm a flint knapper, experimental flint knappers. I've been starting my studies as a straightforward archaeologist, Paleolithic archaeology. And I had the opportunity to think a bit more about the history of the discipline and its concepts. And that's how I encountered both Marcel Mauss and his student Dubois, who study technology in the sense of the study of techniques. And they did so with a sociological mindset and without the sort of dualism or dichotomies that are very common in the Anglo-Saxon world between the symbolic and the material, the substrate and the superstructure. So their approach had always appealed to me. And having worked and published on Marcel Mauss, it was time now to take this technological approach to see how Dubois developed his very distinctive and somewhat disparate view on human techniques.
Was Dubois' work properly understood in his own time? I mean, you've mentioned that some elements of it were given more attention than others, but was his working method and his goal of work understood by his contemporaries?
Well, in some respects, if by understanding one means institutional recognition, then certainly from early in his career, notably during the Second World War, he was able to obtain positions and to develop his research program and his teaching programs in ethnology and in archaeology at the University of Lyon from 1944 to 56, and then at the Sorbonne, and then at the Collège de France from 69 on. So certainly, yes, people have recognized the interest of his work. At the same time, they have been feeling that everyone knows him from their own perspective. So there is the Leroy-Gourhan of the archaeologists, Leroy-Gourhan of the prehistorians, and there is the Leroy-Gourhan of the technologists in the sense of what I've called civilisation matérielle, so the more museum-oriented study of objects with the questions of the description of the object, the provenance, and broadly an approach that resembles a culture-historical diffusionism. That's the first phase of his career. And then there is more interest in his prehistoric interpretation. He was often asked throughout the 50s and 60s to write the first chapter in histories of humanities. Or, you know, both the Nationale schools and others asked him to write about human prehistory. He would be the safe bet for this type of chapter. And lastly, then there is this notion of paléontology that I mentioned at Pincevent. And Pincevent in the south of Paris, Magdalenian campsite that was discovered in the framework of rescue archaeology, and then has been now studied for past 50 years, has been a major training center for archaeologists all over the world who would come there to see how one can, through these the detailed empirical objectivist studies of these traces, try to reconstruct something of the life of the ancestors. So multifaceted approach, multifaceted appreciation that actually reflect his own chameleon-like movement across various disciplines and fields of interest.
And why undertake a project of this sort right now? In other words, why do an edition and translation of Leroy-Gourhan's work in 2020? What is the moment now say about the reception or hoped for reception of this work?
Well, there is one aspect of focus we started with the ignorance of Leroy-Gourhan in the Anglo-Saxon world. So certainly it's never too late to try to do something about it. So 2020 is good. But beyond that, there's a fact that in disciplinary terms, he is a mirror, a reflection of much of what was happening in 20th century social sciences. Because he touched on a number of different topics. He was taught by Marcel Mauss, by Paul Rivet, who belonged to the Durkheimian generation. And then he moved on into various circles in an extremely interesting way that shows how disciplines interact with each other and construct each other in the middle of the 20th century. Just to give an example, in a single year, he was giving papers and publishing for the Centre International de Synthèse, so the historians of Henri Baer, and then for the circle of missionaries, Réroux Méclassier, about how the mission can, and ethnographers and mission, how they can work together to better understand the natives. And the next year he was giving a paper at the cybernetic cycle about the relation with the machine and so forth. So a very wide-ranging solicitations of him that reflect the absorption by him of a number of different perspectives. What is complicated in this view further is that he left school at 14. He was self-taught. Of course, he went to university, but he doesn't have the reflex of bibliographies. So you never know where it comes from. He takes ideas without any references. So one has to track, and that was the great fun for me, to track his references for example, in psychology, to Pierron, to Meyerson. In other disciplines, he's been very obscure, so but tracking him down is a way to see the making of 20th century social sciences. The last point, why would one want to read the book, buy it eventually, yeah, when it's out, is that the topic that it touches on, technology, is of course very pertinent. His ideas that are partly inspired from Henri Bergson's conception of élan vital, partly inspired by this notion of homo faber, have complete contemporary resonance, even in the age of cyborgs and biotechnology. The way that he's been trying to insert some sort of monism, some sort of unitary view from the protozoaries all the way to the humans in this notion of technicity, which is a sort of mental and vital function, is something that could very much appeal to readership today when we are interested, as I said, in these questions of the relations between humans and the technicity and the co-construction of objects and subject, or when we are looking at questions of craft and the skills and the place of the hand in the manufacture and this sort of broad range of questions, we could profit well, I hope, from a reading of Laurent.
Thank you very much, Nathan. We've been talking today with Nathan Schlanger, editor of Andre Dubois on Technology, Material Civilization, Technical Behavior, and the Evolution of Technicity, a selection of his writings from the 1930s to the 1960s, forthcoming in Cultural Histories of the Material World. Nathan, thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure.